From the WKYT studios in Lexington, this is Kentucky Newsmakers with Bill Bryant.
Good morning from WKYT News. I'm Bill Bryant, hoping you're having a nice weekend. We're just a couple of days away now from Kentucky's hard-fought statewide primary. Partisan voters will decide their nominees on Tuesday for governor and lieutenant governor, for attorney general, secretary of state, state treasurer, and agriculture commissioner. And despite a lively campaign, Secretary of State Allison Lundergan Grimes has looked over historic trends and this year's absentee ballots and is projecting just a turnout of 10%. Later, we'll hear from the Republican candidates for governor and clips of exclusive interviews that I conducted over the last month or so here. And we'll hear from Fayette County Clerk Don Blevins Jr. about the rules for you on Election Day and what to do if you have questions about voting. But first, a WKYT Herald Leader Bluegrass poll shows the Republican race for governor a dead heat heading toward the primary. This was conducted last week. And political writer Sam Youngman from the Herald Leader grew up in Kentucky, then worked in the whirlwind of Washington before returning home, where he now works for the Lexington Herald Leader. He thought it was going to be all nice and calm and peaceful when he got back to Kentucky, right?
I know. Who would have thought that I'd miss the civility of Washington, D.C.?
Yeah, it's been a tough one. All right, Sam, this poll shows it's anybody's game here heading into Tuesday among at least 3 of the 4 Republican candidates.
That's right. It's gotten hot, it's gotten nasty, and it's a complete toss-up going into Tuesday. I mean, it's remarkable. You know, you think about how often we go into an election night not knowing who's going to win. It rarely happens. You consider that modern polling, but I wouldn't bet on any one of these horses right now.
I mean, look at that. You have that is a statistical tie among Bevin, Comer, and Heiner. Right. In other words, this could go any way right now.
Right. And trying to poll this kind of turnout, when you're talking about a 10% turnout, is very difficult. I mean, 10% turnout, gosh, that could come down to whoever's got the most relatives who vote. But you start looking at who's got who's got what kind of ground game. You know, with Hal Heiner, what we've seen for months, he brought on a new campaign manager, a man named Kyle Robertson, who's had a lot of success in Republican gubernatorial races. I expect Hal Heiner to have a modern, sophisticated turnout machine. With Jamie Comer, you know, he's got this statewide network that's been in play for years, you know, since he was in Future Farmers of America, sort of what you might call a courthouse strategy. You know, get the county clerks on your side so when people show up and say, who are we voting for? They say, well, you're voting for my friend Jamie Comer. With Matt Bevin, it's all about passion. It's all about, you know, die-hard Tea Party-style Republicans and he's betting on emotion, really, betting that they'll turn out just because they're that excited to vote for him.
Let's not leave out Will T. Scott, right, who shows up at 8%, but as you said, with this wildly low turnout, right, he's been working his geographic base of eastern Kentucky very hard, and if he were somehow able to turn up the vote in some of those counties, bets are off, huh?
That's right. You know, and I've talked to Will T. Scott about this before. Everywhere you go, people love Will T. Scott. When they hear him speak, they're blown away. He's funny, he's folksy, he's got messages that he cares about, and that comes across when he's speaking. The problem he has is that not enough people know who he is. He just hasn't had the money to be on the television airwaves the way the other candidates have. So many people that might actually want to vote for this guy, especially as this race has gotten nasty, just don't know who he is.
Do you think it turned nasty because there is not a lot of difference in the issues? These candidates basically have the same stands, especially on the social issues and on many others when it comes to health care, education, and so forth. Do you think that's why inevitably it had to kind of get gritty?
I think so. I think there was a degree of inevitability that this was going to turn into a war of personalities, a war of, you know, just a mudslinging contest, because as you say, there's not a lot of difference. They're in favor of right to work, they're opposed to Obamacare. I mean, going down the list, they sort of have a conservative checklist that they've all checked off. But the truth of the matter is, this race has always been nasty, even before Comer got in the race, even before Heiner got in the race, which was well over a year ago. You know, it's been a very personal contest between those two men. In fact, I would theorize that if Matt Bevin pulls this thing off, which would have seemed unthinkable a year ago, it's because that Comer and Heiner were so focused on each other, they either didn't notice or didn't take seriously a new candidate getting in the race.
There were all those allegations we were talking about last week, and then this week it seemed to get at Nice. There was an event in Louisville on Thursday night, and in fact, I think your headline said something about everybody plays nice at the what is the last joint appearance of the candidates. And then Friday morning comes an ad from Hal Heiner that apparently attempts to take advantage of the issues going on there and the anger that the candidates are feeling.
Right. The Heiner campaign is calling it a response to a super PAC ad, a pro-Comer super PAC ad, which is accused Heiner of running a dirty tricks campaign. I can sort of make the case that it's a response ad, but let's be honest, this is Hal Heiner introducing these allegations to a broader audience using paid media. This is Republican officials' worst nightmare, really. They're worried about bringing the party back together after May 19th. They're worried about, our polling shows Jack Conway beating every one of these Republicans, and this is only going to help him do that, I think. But what you're seeing from Heiner, I really think this is a swing for the fences. This is the ad of somebody who believes the bluegrass poll, believes that he's in third place, I think.
Put yourself in the shoes of each of these candidates. If you're Hal Heiner, in addition to the media that you have on the air right now, do you really have to try to churn up that Louisville vote where he has an obvious advantage?
Oh, I don't think there's any question. In fact, if we look at the polling that we've got now compared to where it was a month ago, the biggest difference, Heiner was leading. It looked like maybe running away with this thing a month ago. What has happened is you've seen Matt Bevin cut into that Louisville lead. I think Hal Heiner has to turn out every last Louisville Republican that knows him, that voted for him for Metro Council. He's also got to do a good job in Eastern Kentucky. We've seen Jamie Comer sort of eat into his lead there. Matt Bevin is running away with it in Northern Kentucky, and Jamie Comer is very strong in Western Kentucky. So where Hal Heiner has to be successful is in Louisville and the East.
Well, as we look at the fall race, and as you mentioned, of course, I think we have a graphic here we can show at least first the Conway situation. Well, he has a tremendous lead over Jeff Young, 5-1 for the Democratic nomination. So assuming Conway pulls this off and is the nominee, he will then face one of the Republicans. This is the scenario, according to the poll by the Herald Leader, WKYT, WHAS-TV, and the Courier-Journal, the Bluegrass poll. If the fall race were to start Wednesday, this is somewhat the way it would stand.
That's right. I mean, and it looks to be, from where we were a month ago, that Conway has significantly added to the leads he had over each of these candidates. Comer, somewhat surprisingly, considering the news that's been out there for the last week, is running the closest, 6 points behind. If I'm not mistaken, a month ago, that was 3 points. His next biggest lead is over Matt Bevin at 11 points, and then Hal Heiner at 12 points. And what you're seeing as the candidates are making their closing arguments is they're arguing who's the best to take on Jack Conway. I think this poll helps Comer's argument a little bit just because the margin's a little bit closer than it is for Bevin and Heiner.
Has it been masterful for Conway to just kind of sit back quiet during this campaign, or are you surprised that he didn't run some ads, try to get some attention on himself during this Republican battle? I'm
of two minds on this. Last year I was very vocal in arguing that Allison Lonergan Grimes made an enormous mistake by not using the time when Mitch McConnell was occupied with Matt Bevin, by not using that time to introduce herself. I'm not sure that applies in this race. I think Jack Conway has been probably wise to just keep his head down, raise money, and let the Republicans destroy each other, because that's basically what's happened here. I think he's on much stronger footing. For one, he's better well known than Allison Lonergan Grimes was. He's run statewide a few times. People know, they have a better sense of, I won't say they know him, but they have a better sense of who he is. And really, I think of Sun Tzu, who said, when your enemies are destroying each other, get out of the way.
People keep asking me, when will we know Tuesday night? And we're going to be teaming up for some special coverage, WKYT.com and Kentucky.com, and people will be able to see some coverage there as we'll analyze and look at the race that night. The answer is you won't know until you get those votes out of the Central Time Zone, because you could see one result appearing to be shaping up, and then here comes Western Kentucky.
That's exactly right. I mean, it's full of suspense. If you're a political junkie, then this is your kind of election night, because there's just no telling. And we won't know, I think, until every last vote is counted.
We also looked at Rand Paul's desire to run for both president and for re-election to his Senate seat in our poll. And voters, the Republicans anyway, seem to think that's okay. They agree that he can run for both offices, with 52% saying that's fine with them.
Yeah, this is a big plus for Senator Paul, because I think there was some consternation, especially in the last few months, as they've talked about moving from a primary to a caucus that lets him get around this Kentucky state law that prohibits a candidate from appearing on the same ballot twice. I think there was some concern among some in the Paul camp that running for both offices, especially when you have somebody like Marco Rubio in Florida saying, I won't run for both because I can't do both well, I think there was some concern that that might be a liability going forward. This poll has to put them at ease.
There was a result in the poll that indicated that Republicans, though, do think there should be a primary rather than a caucus. But the leadership of the Republican Party seems to be headed down the path toward a caucus.
Right. I think that train has left the station. They're working on the rules for it as we speak. But I think anytime you're talking about changing something this traditional, the late May primary, it's always been that way. They're moving now to basically an untested. I would love to know what percentage of Kentucky Republicans don't know what a caucus is outside of Iowa. So I think there's going to be some reluctance, and I think this is a very big danger zone for Rand Paul going into next year. If you're talking about, in Kansas, for example, they switched to a caucus and had 4% turnout. That's very problematic, especially if you look at a state Republican Party that's on the rise.
If you look at having a caucus versus a primary, and you look at if they do go ahead with this caucus, you said they're writing the rules. Will they be apportioned? That is, if you get 10% of the vote, you get 10% of the delegates to the convention, or will they all go to the winner?
Well, to me, that's a $64,000 question. They're still figuring this out. One of the things our poll looked at was just the Republican presidential primary. Who do you support? I think we gave 10 names. It could be as many, I don't know, 40. But we found that, Senator Paul's winning with 26%. We saw Mike Huckabee, who in 2008 came in second in Kentucky, in second in this poll with 15%. Now, if you're Mike Huckabee and you've got, this 20-person field, you're going towards convention and every delegate matters. If the Kentucky caucuses are proportionally allocated, then every delegate matters. And you're going to come here and you're going to compete for 1-2 delegates, and I think that will tell the tale of whether or not Kentucky is really a player in the 2016 nomination.
Well, one more interesting result from our poll, and let's take a look at this, as as Rand Paul tries to make the case that he would like to carry the Republican banner across this nation, this is the result within Kentucky from the Bluegrass poll right now, that it would be a tie at the moment between Hillary Clinton, if she's the Democratic nominee, and Rand Paul, if he's the Republican.
Well, if you're standing with Rand, this has got to be a hard stopper. If you're a Kentucky Democrat, this is exactly what you've wanted to see. I think that this should be a wake-up call for Senator Paul, that he can't take Kentucky for granted. Having said that, I talked to University of Kentucky political science professor Steve Voss, who said, look, this is where the polling was between McConnell and Grimes early on, and then Kentucky voters, conservative in nature, reverted back to their natural voting patterns as we got closer to the election. The Clintons have made it clear, though, that they're looking to compete in all 50 states. They've already announced that they've got a field organizer here in Kentucky. So I think at this point, they're trying to expand the map as much as they can.
As Paul tries to run for re-election to the Senate seat at the same time, are you hearing of Democratic challengers who are out there?
I think there are a lot of people we're trying to egg into the race. I think there are a lot of people that are thinking about it. I think people like State Auditor Adam Edlin is probably giving it a look. The problem I think they have is last year's election Senate race sort of had a chilling effect on Democrats who might think about running for federal office. Allison Lonergan Grimes was well funded. She had the Democratic Party establishment at her back, and she lost by 16 points. That's got to give anybody, especially someone like Edlin, whose star is on the rise, that's got to give you pause.
All right, Sam Youngman from the Herald Leader. Look forward to your reporting the rest of this campaign, and certainly on election night as well. Again, WKYT.com with special coverage that evening. Now, we are coming back in just a moment. We'll hear from Fayette County Clerk Don Blevins about the rules out there. That's coming up on WKYT, and a little bit later we'll hear from the 4 Republican candidates for governor. Welcome back to Kentucky Newsmakers. Primary election is upon us. There will be some new rules, including a smaller zone around polling places where there can be no campaigning. What do you need to bring to the polls? How do you know where to vote? Fayette County Clerk Don Blevins Jr. joining me. He was, before in office, his dad was the county clerk here for some 30 years. We appreciate you coming in. Appreciate it very much. You said the staff's taking care of things for a few minutes so you can talk to us.
That's true, Bill. Yes, I have a great staff.
Federal court struck down Kentucky's law that called for an organization for anybody to be 100 feet or 300 feet or more was the rule, the state barrier around polling places. It also, that rule affected private property. Now there is, from the State Board of Elections, a rule that's been promulgated that's just for a 100-foot barrier, and it does not affect private property, right?
That's correct. This is an interesting decision because years ago, as you know, they actually took down our 500-foot barrier, and that's when we dropped to 300, and now the court's decided that even that's too far. I thought the main problem here was the fact that the signage was on private property. Fayette County's never done that before, where we've enforced this 300-foot rule on private property. But in Campbell County, evidently they did, and that's what triggered the lawsuit.
Are you disappointed in the projected turnout statewide of 10% that the Secretary of State's office has said is likely to be what happens on Tuesday?
Absolutely, I'm disappointed. You know, we put a lot of money into putting on an election. It's our God-given right and duty, in my opinion, to go to the polls. What I think is the main issue when we have a light turnout is we don't get the results that's the true will of the public. As we were discussing off camera, I believe that it can lead to random results in the election.
Does it cost taxpayers the same amount to hold an election, whether you have a very low turnout or a heavier turnout?
That's right. It's the same exact amount.
What do people need to do on Election Day in terms of what do they need to bring to the polling place?
Well, let's start with voting.
Yeah, yeah.
After that, you need some form of identification. Under current Kentucky law, your driver's license will work, your Social Security card, any ID that has your photograph or your signature on it, all of those will work. Obviously, if you're known by the election officers, that's another way, an acquaintance of them. So that's all you really need is to show up, produce identification, sign the roster, and you're ready to go.
How are you to know where your polling place is?
Well, there's several options. The primary one that's probably the easiest is just use our website, which is FayetteCountyClerk, all spelled out.com. Go to the elections part, and it'll walk you through what you need to do.
If you believe you have a right to vote, but you go there and your name is not there, or there is some other issue about your identity or whatever, can you vote a provisional ballot?
Not in this election. Provisional ballots are really only for the national, federal elections. However, the election officers are trained to call our office, verify what your situation is, and typically it's just that you're at the wrong precinct and we can direct you where you need to go.
If people have questions or they see problems such as fraud or vote buying on Election Day, what should they do?
They can either call my office, or the Secretary of State also has a voter fraud line that they maintain during the election.
Is voter fraud a continuing problem in 2015?
Well, I think in some of the smaller counties we still have that kind of activity. In Fayette County, I'm not aware of anything other than the occasional voter who knows that they have moved and is fraudulent in that they vote in the wrong precinct. But that kind of stuff, I think, is the bare minimum that we see in Fayette County.
Asking you to take your purely office holder hat off for a second and looking at this thing politically just for a moment, what is it that causes such a low voter turnout? Why don't people exercise their right?
Well, in this particular case, it's that, you know, the vast majority of Democrats have nothing. I shouldn't say that. There's not much to choose from in terms of the Democrats, so half the electorate right there is not enthused about the ticket. The other thing is none of the nonpartisans can vote. If you're independent or if you change your registration after January 1st of this year, you can't vote in this election. So that takes out another chunk of people. And that leaves the Republicans, who have a very interesting race to consider.
And yet, it looks like even the Republican side, the turnout indications are low.
It's apathy.
What have you seen in terms of absentee voting?
Very light, although I have to tell you, Bill, the absentee voting can be misleading because those voters are passionate about voting if they make the extra effort to do absentee. So far we've seen about 300 in-office votes and maybe 150 mail-ins.
So on Election Day, this coming Tuesday, polls will open
6 a.m.
to 6 p.m.
6 p.m. If you're in line at 6 p.m., we'll make sure you get your shot. So please come.
And the Kentucky law, as far as people working somewhere and needing some time off to go vote, it allows for that, right?
It does. Employers are required to give up to 4 hours if necessary. I believe that 12 hours is plenty. Everybody really has a shot. You know, most of us work 8 to 5, so you got 2 hours before and 2 hours after. It's doable.
As Kentucky continues to have these low turnouts, I mean, is there any talk of maybe moving to an open primary system or something that might jolt this?
There's occasional legislation for the open primary. I'm not a fan of open voting before each election. I don't like early voting at all.
And what that means with the open primary is that you could cross over and choose which party you wanted to vote in on that day.
I'm really not a fan of either of those. The one idea that might get my attention is to move the elections from Tuesdays to a weekend day, say on a Saturday. We might see an increase in turnout for that, but basically everything that's been tried so far in the United States has not worked. We did motor voter, and now nearly everyone is registered, so that isn't a prohibition. I really don't know, Bill, but I wish we could figure it out.
All right. Moving beyond Election Day, it is predicted the U.S. Supreme Court will rule on same-sex marriage in late June. If the court were to overturn the state bans, such as the one in place in Kentucky, are county court clerks prepared for that?
Well, I think we're all prepared. There's certainly division along party lines about whether you support it or not. But once the Supreme Court rules, I don't think any of us will have any choice but to issue those licenses.
And would you be prepared to move quickly on that?
Oh, absolutely. I'm in favor and support of that, but current Kentucky law says we can't do it.
There's a difference in the new license plate stickers that are out there. They used to be more colorful. Now they're black and white, right?
Yes, we've gone to a new system, and it's much more efficient. I'm very pleased. It's called the POD system, for print decal on demand. But the new registration receipts are now 8.5 by 11. They look very similar to the old ones, and the sticker's actually embedded in the sheet. So it's a little more efficient for us. It's been a good change.
What was that to keep them from being stolen or duplicated? Or?
No, if you may recall, we used to give you the little one by itself, and we had to inventory those, and it was difficult for customers. Sometimes they dropped them and lost them. So now having it embedded on the sheet's a lot nicer for everybody concerned. It's a little more efficient, less costly.
Appreciate you coming in, Fayette County Clerk Don Blevins Jr. Appreciate it. And we'll be back in a moment. A few words from the 4 Republican candidates for governor here on WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers. Welcome back to WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers. Tuesday's primary will nominate candidates for statewide office. The 4 Republican candidates for governor each recently appeared for separate and exclusive interviews here on Kentucky Newsmakers.
I'm a businessman, I'm a job creator, I'm a man who is affected day in and day out by all the regulatory overreach by the federal government and state level government. So I understand firsthand what it is to be out there in the working world, employing people, making payroll. And the very same knowledge that had led me to that race has led me to this, and that is that we have got some serious issues to be addressed in our country. We are not in good shape financially, and if we do not make some very intentional decisions with respect to what we are doing to create wealth, create jobs, create opportunities for people, we are going to be in trouble. And so this is what I'm bringing to the equation here. Every candidate will talk about the need to get people from poverty in our state to the workforce. I'm the only one in this race who grew up below the poverty level. I understand from firsthand experience what it means to make one's way into the employable workforce. People will talk about the need to address Veterans Affairs, as you noted. Only 2 of us have actually ever served in the military, and only 1 of us who has a real opportunity at this point to win this race, I think.
Well, we need to change directions in the state. The state's desperate for leadership. We need conservative leadership with a bold agenda, but a bold agenda from a leader that can actually pass that bold agenda through the General Assembly. I looked at the problems that the state had. I know I can solve those problems. I can work together in a bipartisan way to bring people together to make Kentucky's business climate more competitive and to change the culture in Frankfort, which we really need to do. I have a record of achievement when it comes to passing legislation. You look at Governor Beshear, he's a nice guy, but he's failed to ever pass any significant legislation. If we want to do things to make Kentucky's economy more competitive, we're going to have to pass legislation. There are issues that Republicans and Democrats will never agree on, but there are issues that we do agree on. We agree we need to create more jobs in this state. We agree we need tax reform in the state. If we're going to pass comprehensive tax reform in Kentucky, it's going to have to pass through the Kentucky General Assembly. So I have a record of achievement passing legislation. I know that there are like-minded Democrats that are conservative.
What makes my candidacy stand out from the other candidates is I have spent my life in the business sector, directly in the business of job attraction. And I'll tell you, as I talk to Kentuckians, they tell me again and again, I hear about the spouse that's having to drive 40 miles one way to find the job, about a concern about their children when they finish their education, will they be able to stay in Kentucky? And I believe it's the #1 issue facing the state. And it's an area that I believe I'm uniquely qualified, so I've been introducing myself all across the state for over a year now. My background has been in the private sector and growing jobs. I know what we need to do in Kentucky to compete. Jack's background has been in Frankfurt. We differ completely on right to work. I know we have to have right to work if we're going to compete in Kentucky. You know, he's opposing right to work. His president, you know, has brought Obamacare, you know, to Kentucky. And I oppose Obamacare and think we need an entirely different, a conservative approach to provide health care. So I think the voters will be faced with a very stark contrast between the two of us. And what I'm feeling as I travel around the state, regardless of party, that people are joining on our campaign.
Kentucky's been real good to me, Bill, and I serve. I mean, that's my life's mission on earth. And I have to keep serving until, you know, I'm not wanted or my ideas are no longer relevant. So I'm here to serve, and, you know, I just stepped down after 10 years on the Kentucky Supreme Court. I was, if you rated me, you would have to say I was very successful in shifting the opinions of the court towards solutions that really work for Kentucky based upon legal precedents, you know, under our previous Supreme Courts. But I'm 67 years old. I still parachute jump. Right. I still snow ski with my kids. I still raise and train my bird dogs and hunt with them. But I've got a good 8 to 10, I hope 12, maybe 15 years left. And I know the problems in Kentucky, and I'm carrying the solutions for them. I'm not guided by dogma. I don't take a bit and bridle from the leadership of my party very well. And I have solutions, and I come out here and I'm free. I'm the only free candidate really in this race. And I'm not criticizing any of my opponents because they are really good people. But I've got 3 people I'm running against that want to be governor. There's one person, Will T., who just wants to fix the problems and make the sun shine a little bit brighter in Kentucky tomorrow.
The 4 Republicans running for governor. We want to thank you for joining us for this edition of Kentucky Newsmakers. Remind you that we'll have Election Day coverage throughout primary day coming up Tuesday, and on WKYT.com, special coverage beginning at 6:30. I'll see you bright and early this week on WKYT this morning, starting at 4:30, mid-morning at 10, and WKYT News at noon. Make it a good week ahead.